Hey everyone, I'm James Albrasin, founder and CEO of Family Labs. I'm doing Family Talks episode 4 with Allison Fromm, the CFO of the LUKSO Foundation. Allison, how are we today?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me, James. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise, likewise. I feel like you can really go into depth into your past and also what you've been up to with LUKSO. I'm curious actually on your before we get into LUKSO, Allison, I'm curious about what your past was like. I saw in your LinkedIn profile you're mainly in the financial side of things. I'm curious on how you got into that from your childhood and your teenage years. Were you always into numbers, into maths? Is that your thing?
Oh, that's a funny question. And the answer is definitely not. No, no, no. I took a very strange path to finance. I studied history as an undergraduate, and then my first job after university, I was an English teacher in the Balkans in North Macedonia. Actually, there's a North Macedonian on the Universal Everything team. I'm super happy to always to talk with people from North Macedonia. I had a great time there. But then I left English teaching and I moved to Montana. And my first job in Montana was at a ski resort where I literally took the job to meet people and ski for free. And I was working in the little cafe making breakfast burritos and flipping hamburgers, and that was my job. But it was a small family-owned ski area, and the owner would come regularly through the line in the cafe, so I got to know him, and he needed a bookkeeper, long story short, because his bookkeeper had quit. And so he knew me and offered to basically teach me bookkeeping, probably paid me a ridiculously low wage since I was a ski bum. But that's how I got started learning about business. So I like to say I'm the only ski bum who developed a passion for accounting. And that's how I got into the business side of the accounting and finance profession.
Right. So you were originally in from the US, Allison, but you moved to
Yes.
Switzerland. Right. Okay. Cool.
Yes. So I'm
And
American, basically, originally. And most of my working career prior to 2020 was in the US.
nice. And how did that serendipity come from um you transitioning into finance, into Web3, into Luxury specifically? How did that moment come up into you getting that
Yeah.
role?
Yeah, so from from working at the ski resort where I was the accounting department, uh, I I don't want to get too lost in my ancient history because it's not that interesting or relevant, but long story short, then I took a job at the global pharmaceutical company Bayer, we say in Europe, Bayer, we said in the US, where I joined an accounting team of hundreds, if not thousands of people. And I realized I needed a grounding in academic accounting and finance because, as I said, I was a history major and then an English teacher and then a ski bum. So I wanted that financial education. So I did my MBA. And after I finished my MBA at the University of Pittsburgh, I got a job at a corporate bank as a corporate banker, which was a fantastic job. I really loved being at PNC. It was great culture, a good place to work. And in 2017, 2018, my clients, who were the CFOs and CEOs of mid-sized to large companies, started asking me about this thing they were reading about every day in the Wall Street Journal, Bitcoin, and then Ethereum, and then ICOs. And I'm a really intellectually curious person, and I love complicated technologies. And so I started researching it. And as so many people do in crypto, I went down the rabbit hole and got involved in a lot of self education and was on this mission to be able to explain this crazy, wild, complicated technology to business people in language that they would not only understand, but would understand why it mattered, not just what it did. So that was 2017, 2018, 2019. And then for family reasons, I relocated to Switzerland. And I don't know if you know, but Zug, where I live, where the foundation is headquartered, is the crypto valley. So Ethereum was born in Zug. So, what better place to transition from the stable, boring world of corporate banking to this wild west of blockchain technology, but in the crypto valley? The first 4 years or so that I was living in Zug, I would say it was really kind of a deep dive for me to learn the technology by doing a variety of different things. So one of the things I did was to form my own company, Crypto Alley, which I used as a vehicle to learn about a lot of different kinds of things, including decentralized grants and decentralized identity. And I did a lot of different projects that were funded either through grants or I had mandates from other companies. And it was a great learning opportunity. I really got deeply into staking and blockchain treasuries and on-chain governance and especially decentralized identity and the connections between the decentralized identity technologies and the blockchain world. But I was looking for the next step and to join a team of people building something really special. And when I was invited to join LUKSO as the CFO of the Foundation for the New Creative Economies, it was really a great fit between traditional finance and blockchain and the concept of identity, which I had been really working very deeply in right before I joined the foundation. So I think
Yeah,
that's
no,
not to make
I
a
love
long
that.
story even longer. That's the journey.
No, I love that background. I feel like people would really enjoy listening about that. I'm just curious about maybe if you can go into more personal, like the actual, like how did that role come up? Did Fabian come to you, or did you guys meet in person randomly? And like, because from what I've spoken with Jan, he met Fabian through his neighbor. It was such a random situation, and I feel like just that serendipity of it all. I mean, I'm really curious on that.
Yeah, I actually just had to think how I even got connected. No, I didn't meet Fabian until I was in the interview process already. But I think I met Lucian, the obviously the CEO of the foundation, through mutual friends. So I guess there was somewhat of a serendipity there as well.
And you mentioned that you got into LUKSO because of identity, Alison. Maybe you can go into more detail about, LUKSO's value prop that you see. Maybe you can go into more expand on how LUKSO can provide decentralized identity and this universal profiles to people.
Sure. So, where to start with that one? So let me start. Obviously, this is a Luxo focused podcast. I can start with what I see as the core of Luxo's value proposition, which comes from my personal experience, from my work history, and then obviously from knowing the technology. Um, I think identity. I think everybody knows that identity online is pretty broken, and not in the least because we don't own our identities. I would say we not me. I have heard people say, and I fundamentally agree with it, we rent our online identities. And the best example that I use to talk about what it means to rent your identity instead of own it is that I, way back in the day, you may have heard me tell this story before, but way back in the day, I had a Hotmail account, if you remember Hotmail. And at the time, this was in my first experience living in Europe, I had connected to people that I met and we exchanged Hotmail addresses. So I'm going to date myself here, but this was before social media and Facebook and all of the great tools for connecting with each other. So and there weren't most people didn't have cell phones either. So I was moving around a lot and I didn't have a consistent landline. Oh, I'm losing my light here. Um, and the way I connected with people was I gave them my Hotmail account and we emailed each other. So I moved back to the US and my Hotmail account was taken away from me. It just one day I went to log in and it was gone. And who do you even call at Hotmail? I tried to get through to customer service, and the best I could do, I got an email back from somebody saying, "Yeah, sorry about that. Feel free to open a new account." But there was nothing I could do. All of my contacts were gone, irretrievably gone, with no way to reconnect. So I lost friendships and relationships in the ether of Hotmail somewhere because I lost that account. And who knows? I mean, those people were probably emailing me and wondering why I never responded. It was really devastating. And it was clear to me that I didn't own that handle. Hotmail owned it, and
Exactly.
I got to borrow it. And what did Hotmail get from me? What do we get in exchange for borrowing these handles? They get our data. And that's just not fair or sustainable. And so, what Web3 decentralized identity does, what LUKSO does, is allows individuals to own their identity. Because when you control that private key, you own it. Nobody can take it away from you. And then LUKSO goes one step farther because we want we want everybody to benefit from the advantages of owning your identity. And LUKSO not only makes it possible to own your identity, but makes it easy. Because one of the scary things about using blockchain, using crypto, is you gotta take care of this crazy private key thing that maybe you write down some words on a piece of paper, and when you send money, you've got to like hope and pray and check 15,000 times
Too
to make sure what you're
complicated,
sending is
exactly.
right. It's way too complicated. So with LUKSO, not only do you own your identity, but it is increasingly easy to use it through the concept of a universal profile.
And I feel like you've touched on a really good point of, reducing the complexity of this technology, right, Alison? From my point of view, technology is supposed to be just very simple to use. That's how adoption gets to people, right? So I'm curious on how you see LUKSO in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, Alison. What's like the success in your point of view? Where do you see it? How does it affect people's lives? That kind of perspective of it all.
Yeah, so I think the value proposition is at least three things. So one is owning your identity, two is making it easy to own your identity, but three is the economic value proposition. Because it not only has to be easy, but people have to benefit from it. And the story that I tell there, again, is not my own, but it comes from a fantastic book by Chris Dixon, Read, Write, Own. So Web 1 is read. Back in the first days of the internet, we had static web pages. It was basically a library of computers interconnected to each other, and you could find out information from anywhere all over the world. And then the innovation of Web 2 was that people began to write. We started to upload our own content. So, there's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's YouTube. We are now providing the content. But the monetization of Web 2, the model, is that the platform owner takes the vast majority of the revenues. So when you look at Facebook, when you look at Twitter, when you look at, I think, Instagram, the statistics in Chris Dixon's book, those central platforms take 97% of the profits that come from advertising. So we provide the content, we bring the eyeballs, we make it an interesting place where people want to hang out digitally. Advertisers want to be there, and then those advertising revenues flow to the company, not to the individuals at the edges of the network who are providing the excitement. When you look at
Exactly.
Web3, which is own, when people own their digital identities, their digital assets, that formula is inverted. So when you look at Ethereum, the transaction fees, 97% go to the network participants, and only a tiny fraction go to the platform itself, which is anyway made up of individual businesses. So where I see LUKSO is providing not only ownership of identity, not only ease of use, but an economic incentive for people to use Web3 technology, because with those two benefits, they can have greater economic opportunity than they would using Web 2. And then two more things about LUKSO. What Chris Dixon talks about, one of the dangers of Web3 that we're facing is this idea of re-centralization. So as long as you own your identity, and as long as you're owning digital assets, then you can achieve these benefits. The danger is that because it's so complicated to use, what we were talking about, the seed phrase, the address,
Exactly.
private companies come in and provide an easy to use portal to access the blockchain. But then that portal becomes a bottleneck. And once a company controls the access to the blockchain, then they might as well just be Web 2 all over again, build on a blockchain. But what's the difference? If they control that access point, they can charge whatever fees they want, and that centralized company can start to get more of the economic benefits again. So how do we prevent that? What Dixon says is you need two critical things. The first is ease of use. It has to be easy to interact directly with the blockchain. You shouldn't have to rely on a centralized intermediary. And the second critical thing is it has to be easy to switch. So if you start to feel like your platform is charging you too much, it has to be easy to move to a different platform. So that is
Mm,
exactly what LUKSO enables with universal profiles. So first of all, it's easy to use. It's way easier to use a universal profile than it is to use just about any other wallet, and it's only getting better and easier as Universal Everything continues to roll out the technology and upgrade things. So LUKSO brings ease of use. But the other thing that LUKSO brings is the standards around all of these great innovations and concepts are
that's
at
it.
the protocol level. So Fabian didn't build an app on top of Ethereum to provide identity. He built a fundamental protocol layer with standards at the protocol layer that everybody benefits from. So what that means is with your universal profile, with your native LUKSO identity, you should be able to easily switch between applications, which really reduces the risk that a single company could re-centralize control and become the gatekeeper with power to charge whatever rents they want because they have too much control of the network.
Do you feel like once the ease of use is in the blockchain, it's in people's hands, it's in companies, do you feel like institutions or even other um, governments or even they will come in? Allison, what's your dealings with other big companies? I feel like from my experience dealing with these enterprises, they're still quite hesitant on fully coming on chain, right? They're still quite segregated. What's your experience like from your point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think there is a hesitation. It's still a very new industry and untested in many ways. And unfortunately, every scam we have, every corruption, every scandal um, causes one more reason for people to doubt and to be hesitant. But that's where I come back to the economic incentives. We have to, as an industry, show people that it's in their best interest to use the technology. And even more than that, they're going to be left out and left behind and leaving money on the table if they don't
That's it.
adopt the technology. And so, where I really see LUKSO starting that flywheel of adoption is by giving economic incentives for businesses to come on to LUKSO. Because if you can make more money using a Web3 solution than you can using a Web2 solution, why wouldn't you do it? And once those businesses, those brands, those companies start building up followings and showing how to monetize um, a brand, a business, a following using LUKSO technology, it will spread as people realize that it's better. That's how I see it.
Um, I love that. Changing gears a bit here, Allison. You're dealing with a lot of treasury in crypto. How do you apply your principles from your past, from Web to traditional finance into now dealing with like volatility of lux? If it's $1.30 one day, next it's a dollar. How does that affect your day-to-day like life really? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's hard, but I would say that while the volatility is certainly more extreme than traditional fiat currency, foreign exchange hedging, for example, or cash flow projections, as as an experienced financial professional, I would say it's also not that different. So the volatility is on a different order, perhaps, but the fundamental principles are the same. And so I really am drawing on decades of traditional financial experience to build models, to project cash flow, to think about volatility and analyze different scenarios and build models that can be stress tested. I mean, all of those skills that I learned in a traditional financial setting absolutely still apply. And so it is a new world from a technology perspective. I would say it's not a totally new world from a finance perspective.
Right. Any tips you can give out there to other CFOs that same in your shoes? Any ideas or thoughts that you can probably, you know, provide some information on?
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest tip I would give to any CFO who's working in the Web3 space is to invest the energy to understand the technology. I mean, I think that's probably my biggest advantage as a CFO is that I've spent these past 5 years intensively working with blockchain technology. So, I transacted with blockchain. I know how staking works in different protocols, which can be pretty different. You know, I I know what decentralized grant distribution and on-chain governance um, issues can be. And so, while I would say the finance principles are very similar, and somebody who's strong in traditional finance would draw on those skills in any kind of a Web3 CFO role, the technology is very different. And it's a mistake to think that an account in a bank is the same thing as an account on Ethereum. It's not. And I've seen people make mistakes because they just assumed that the knowledge that a Web3 account was just an account on a different platform, not an entirely different thing. And so that would be my biggest advice, is to spend the time really learning the technology. And I've benefited enormously from being around incredible software engineers who are also good teachers. So there are a lot of people I could name, but Fabian is certainly one of them. And I just always feel really privileged when I get to talk to Fabian and he takes time to explain how things work at like a Fabian level, and his
Technical.
team as well. Actually, the whole team has been um, really supportive of my desire to learn ever more about the technology, because I think that's a critical part of doing the job.
What's your thoughts about the intersection of AI and blockchain and LUKSO, Allison? I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's multi-directional. So, of course, we're using AI tools all the time. I mean, we use AI for finance, for legal, software engineering, I'm sure, although that's not my that's not my area. So we're definitely benefiting from it. Um, and I think that one of the biggest challenges of AI is attribution. Who's created the content, especially generative AI, and who's taking the actions with agentic AI. And so it's a perfect marrying of technology where the blockchain and identity can show you who's done what. And so I think that the more we combine actions and creations from AI with identity, both human and identity for AI, the the better off we'll be. So we can track and trace and know who's created what, and what the identity is of the information, or what the source is of the information that we're getting, of the
Exactly.
creations that we're viewing.
You know, to me, Allison, it's so simple to connect those two dots, right? But why do you think it's the adoption is not quite there yet? Why do you think, universal profile is such a fundamental layer to, I feel like, this upcoming era of especially AI being disrupting society, I feel like. What's limiting that adoption from your point of view?
Well, I mean, I think the adoption's growing. I think we're still very much
I agree.
building the technology, so it's not finished yet. So I think the promise is there. I'm not sure it's I'm not sure the focus right now is on um, mass adoption just yet. While we're still creating a lot of the pieces. We just launched the bridge last week, and so that's a fundamental piece of infrastructure that you know is part of the rollout of the entire vision. So I would say that we're on a roadmap and we're making great progress, and I think the potential is absolutely clear, and we're still building.
I agree. And zooming out a bit, do you think like there's some regulations as well that needs to be implemented in the government's level? What's your dealings with like regulators and that sort of stuff?
Yeah. Boy, that's a huge question. So I think that it's a constant evolution. So I think that regulation is important. I think that the balance between providing consumer protection, providing a level playing field, providing certainty for businesses is important, and that has to be very much balanced against supporting innovation and not stifling new developments. I think that's a really hard balance for regulators to find. Um, Again, we haven't done ourselves any favors in the industry. The scandals and the scams make it easy for people to say we need more regulation. And it's
Exactly.
harder to fight the fight to say, but we need to innovate. We need to make things better and different. I think it's a great privilege to be in Switzerland. I think the Swiss regulatory authorities are really doing a good job of trying to find that balance. And I think Switzerland has had a clarity of regulation that's been missing in many other parts of the world. Um, so I think we're getting there.
Yeah. What's your um thoughts as a leader in finance, Allison? I feel like balancing between on-chain and off-chain treasury of finance in a way. What's your uh take in trying to balance that seesaw of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really my choice right now. I mean, there are certain things that must be done on chain. I mean, when we send transactions on chain, they have to be tracked on chain, and we have to do financial reporting and auditing in the traditional way off chain. They're coming ever closer together. We announced
Right.
LUKSO being integrated to Breezing, which is a great platform for accounting where it allows companies to easily track their on-chain transaction and put them into a format that's um, meaningful from the accounting side. So we're starting to see a convergence. And I'll say too, I'll just give a plug to our accounting firm, HS Consult. They're a fantastic accountants in Zurich in Switzerland who really understand blockchain technology, and they're at the forefront of taking advantage of every on-chain automation that they can to make the accounting process more efficient. But if if in the internet side we've gone through Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, I would say on the accounting side where it may be accounting 1.1. In terms of being able to automate on-chain transactions and feed it into the accounting world. And I'm not, this again is not my idea, but people are starting to talk about triple entry bookkeeping. So I'm going to show my accounting nerd
Please
qualifications
do,
here. But
please do. Yeah.
hundreds of years ago, the invention of double entry bookkeeping, so this idea of credits and debits and everything has to balance, was a revolutionary invention, probably as exciting as blockchain today. And it really allowed innovation and growth from a business perspective because companies could understand their finances in a whole new way once they had this ability to track all of their transactions through a system of credit and debits and double entry bookkeeping. It really was a revolution from the business standpoint. The reason that we have that and the reason that we have financial accounting and we have audits is that we have to be able to tell a story of accounting from the internal perspective to the outside world. Here's the summary of all of my transactions that I did internally to you outside stakeholders. But with the blockchain, everything already is transparent. And so people are starting to talk about a triple entry bookkeeping system where you wouldn't even need to have accounting anymore. You wouldn't have to do accounting anymore because everything's already
Mhm.
out there and public and transparent and on the blockchain. So the more our financial infrastructure shifts from traditional financial rails infrastructure to a blockchain-based Web3 infrastructure, the more potential we have to move away from traditional accounting and put everything on chain and then stop doing reporting and auditing. We'll just have a way to read the blockchain and put it into a format that's understandable from a financial reporting perspective. That's my vision anyway. But this is
That's
my personal take on accounting and finance. This is not something that the foundation is working on. It's not something that LUKSO is focused on. We're not an account. We don't have any accounting projects going on. But from my role as a CFO dealing with blockchain transactions, I can see that coming. But like I said, we're at accounting 1.1. That's accounting 3.0. So that's a ways in the future.
um changing gears and zooming out a bit. So I'm curious to hear thoughts about being a leader and your philosophy and that sort of thing. So what's your, if I can be selfish here as well, I'm a first-time founder myself. Any advice, any thoughts that you want to give to the audience, or even me personally?
Oh, well, first of all, congratulations on being a first-time founder. That's really exciting. And secondly, I mean, I think I should be asking you for advice. I'm not a founder. I'm an employee. um, from a leadership perspective, I think I would say the ability to listen is probably one of the hardest things to do, especially as somebody who likes to talk and likes to be heard. I have to remind myself of the importance of listening. Um, and I would say too that as a leader, you just have to constantly remind yourself that you have blind spots and you don't know what you don't know, and allow for the possibility of getting new insights from everywhere and anywhere. I think the more senior a person is, the more authority the person has, the louder the voice can be. But that doesn't, just because you're loud doesn't mean you're always right. And sometimes
Mhm.
it's important to make space for the quiet voices who might have insights and information and ideas that are in my blind spots, or you know, something I didn't know, and creating the opportunity for those voices to be heard is important to me.
Love that. And that could actually a good segue out into the community of LUKSO into Web3 in general. I feel like, especially in social media, with Twitter, with Telegram, it's so easy to, put your ideas or your even your thoughts about the project, right? Any um thoughts about the shift from Web 2 to Web 3, where you're dealing with such an open it's an open project now, right? You're dealing like you're doing like podcasts, you're doing um speaking and all that kind of stuff. Any thoughts regarding that? Is that like a big shift for you? Do you like that? How is that for you?
Yeah, I love it. And yes, it's a huge shift. I mean, for me to speak when I worked at the bank, for me to speak publicly, um, well, let me not even talk about public speaking. For me to post anything on my LinkedIn profile, because I don't no, I didn't have Twitter when I was at the bank. Um, I could only post content that was approved by the bank. I could only post bank approved content. And that already, I mean, this is Web 2, but it was a very interesting dynamic for me, because my LinkedIn profile is mine. It's my personal profile. And yet my employer is telling me what I can and can't post. It's almost as if they were coming into my house and telling me what kind of art I could hang on my walls. Or maybe on the outside of my house, because, the outside of my house is visible publicly. Like what color I could paint my house. I got to work on that analogy, clearly. And so it's a total shift where, I have spent more or less time in crypto Twitter, depending on what I'm doing, where it's just like a wild world of, I could post what I have for breakfast and nobody would care. Um, it's 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 a lot of fun. I feel like I can be myself much more authentically. I feel like I have built relationships with a decentralized community and people I've never met in person, real friendships and meaningful relationships online in a way that, when you're in that corporate box, you just can't. But it also has a ton of risks and problems in terms of, people feel free to say all kinds of things online that they wouldn't in person, and people lie and people scam, and it's a wild west. So it's a fun place to be, but not without its risks.
Exactly. I think, from my point of view as well, Alison, I think what LUKSO brings is really bringing the humanity into this technology. Like everyone's hiding behind seed numbers pretty much, right? Your wallet is just a bunch of numbers. You don't have a profile, you don't have a face. You can easily say, like you said, you can say mean things, but you wouldn't say it in person. But now you have your reputation on the line, you have your name on the line. I think that just makes it more human. I think that's why I'm so drawn into this. Like you said, you're much more authentic, much more yourself, and I think yeah, I think you articulated that very, very beautifully.
Thank you. And I'm glad you used the word reputation, because I think in the digital world, and in the more individual, independent digital arena where we're not in a silo in a well known company, the concept of individual reputation and how do I trust somebody becomes ever more important. And having a trustworthy, visible reputation that says something about my credentials and my capabilities when you may not know anything else about me is important. And I think that's something that that's a fundamental aspect of identity. And again, it's something that a universal profile in LUKSO makes easy to create and to see.
Exactly right. And drawing from your overall experience uh, from Web2, from your financial uh, days, or even like you jumping into Web3 now with LUKSO, what's your bold prediction for finance in the coming years? You mentioned about the accounting. Any other particular thoughts or ideas that you see that's going to be disrupting the finance industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're seeing it already. The volume of stable coins is just exploding, and I think stable coins, in a way that maybe nobody expected even a couple of years ago, are taking over the financial infrastructure. Um, and I think that will continue to happen. And I think when we look at stable coins, they're a fantastic innovation. I think there are two big challenges, those of us who care about decentralization and the original ideals of blockchain and decentralization need to watch. And one is the idea that cryptocurrencies or tokenized assets can bring value that's separate from a central government. And we can talk about whether that's a value or not. And actually, again, being a little bit of a nerd, I'm very interested in researching the history of money. And money has had all kinds of permutations and forms over the centuries and the millennium. Stablecoins, when they're backed by fiat assets, are in many ways just a digital representation of a fiat asset. So how different is that from a philosophical standpoint, even if it's very different from a technological standpoint?
Mm.
But the other thing, which is very like almost opposite but related, is that increasingly private companies are creating stable coins. So I just read somewhere, I forget now what companies they were, but it was something like maybe, I mean, we all saw Facebook with Libra, and I think Walmart is looking to create its own stable coin. And a lot of big companies now want their own
Stripe
stable
has
coin.
one. Hmm.
Stripe has one, yes, exactly, thank you. Because they've realized that it can bring a lot of economic benefits. But now we have a private company who's not only controlling the internet platform, they're also controlling the unit of exchange and the store of value, and that they have their own money. So we could be shifting from an era of fiat money, government controlled money, to private money, but in the hands of a small centralized company, not a democratic, open, public blockchain protocol. And what's that going to look like? That is a big question.
Regarding, as the dollar becomes more like as it collapses or loses value and the price of these assets become higher and higher, do you see that as a form of use as currency in everyday life or even um yeah, that sort of idea?
Oh, I don't think I'm qualified at all to make a prediction about that. One thing I can say with certainty is that no currency ever has enjoyed predominance forever. So at some point, the dollar will no longer be the predominant global currency. If I had to guess, and again, this is not at all my area of expertise, this level of macroeconomic forecasting, I don't see dollar dominance going away anytime particularly soon. So I think sometime between next year and 500 years from now, we'll see the dollar become less dominant. How's that for a specific prediction? I don't know. I know the original vision of Bitcoin was that it could be used as a means of exchange and replace the dollar. I'm not sure Bitcoin or Ethereum are actually best placed to be used as money. I think their use cases are more around the utility they bring for running these networks, or perhaps in Bitcoin's case, as programmable scarcity and a store of value. Um, I think until the volatility really gets to the place where you could you can trust that if you buy a pizza for whatever it was, 500 Bitcoin, a couple years later you won't have spent several $1 million on that pizza. I think it's going to be really hard to use tokens as a means of payment. Um, I think using a blockchain as payment rails is well underway, but that's where I think most of the
Infrastructure.
innovation. is with stablecoins. And I think that brings up its own amount of raises its own amount of questions.
Final question was the a bit of a curveball, Allison, maybe for the community. News or update regarding stablecoins coming into LUKSO? Any alpha regarding that?
Oh gosh, no. I've got nothing.
I
I
tried my best. But yeah, appreciate you taking the time today, Allison. Any final words, final thoughts that you wanna get out there?
think that just say LUKSO, um, Fabian's vision is inspiring and broad and all encompassing and exciting. And I think LUKSO has the potential to make a lot of things in our online life better. And I'm excited to see that journey.
I appreciate you, Allison. Thanks for coming on and hope you have a good day.
Thanks,
Thanks.
James, so much for the conversation and the great questions. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you.